Good morning, all of you. This morning, what I'm going to talk about is urban disaster risk reduction for better urban environments in supporting this very interesting initiative on cities for citizens. So, by keeping urban planning as an important strategy for reducing disaster risk in cities in mind, I'm going to very briefly to talk through why we think that the cities are at risk, and also what drivers risk in urban settings, and also leading up to a brief discussion on the nature of existing strategies for urban planning and also associated limitations. So, what are the cities? The cities can be defined in different ways, but from the point of view of cities and its citizens, cities are closest administrative institutional level to the communities, and also the cities deliver essential services to the citizens, including health, education, transport, etc. And also cities actually plan and control urban development, public works, including issuing of construction permits. And also cities implement and strengthen decentralization process and also local development. So what we have actually noticed during the last 20 years or so is that the role of cities is evolving with increasing responsibilities. Perhaps 10 to 20 years ago, cities focused on delivering basic services, but now there are a lot more responsibilities are there for cities to meet. For example, combat crime and violence, climate change, implementing national policies at the local level, etc. So, urban settlements are home to more than 50% of the world population. That has been already established. Globally, in that sense, by 2014, overall around 54% of the world population residing in urban areas, but it is expected to go up to 66% by 2050. Quite an alarming set of statistics. Just to further illustrate on this issue, you can actually see in this slide how the Metro Manila area in Philippines looked like ranging from 1975 to 2010. So you can actually see how the urbanization has grown in this particular city. So in that sense, the impact of natural hazards in a densely populated area can be catastrophic. An area like this. This is why disaster planning is now more urgent than in the world's than ever before in the world's big urban centers. And also, not only that, the lack of safe lands, which leads to developments in marginal and hazard-prone land, such as sloping lands, floodplains, and so forth, is also another factor which actually contribute towards cities being at risk. And also, not only that, the high population density and poverty. It is said that almost 3/4 of urban population live in low and middle income countries, particularly in informal settlements and slums. And of course, from the very recent past, the Turkey earthquake, there's a concern about low building standards and inappropriate construction. So this is actually also a matter for concern. So overall, what does this mean? The net effect of these drivers are very complex, but fast-growing cities and urban areas are engines of growth and wealth accumulation. This growth has positive results in social improvements as well as cultural, educational, and other impacts. Fast economic growth combined with rapid population expansion in urban areas also increases disaster vulnerability and exposure. In that sense, if not addressed, disaster risk will increase as a result of unmanaged urbanization. This actually creates substantial challenges for those that attempt to develop resilient strategies for cities. So, within this context, effective urban planning has been recognized as an important strategy for reducing disaster risk in cities. This is the point that I want to emphasize at this very important platform. For example, within that context, the need for maintenance and upkeep of the cities makes safety measures for their citizens crucial in these situations. Therefore, it is fair to say that urban planning has been recognized as a key factor to build the resilience of urban communities as a whole. With that in mind, I'm going to actually sort of take you through some of the findings from one of our studies. As you can sort of see, it has been published and it is accepted to. You can actually access it via this particular link on open access. This is actually as a result of an international study aimed at exploring the status of urban planning particularly in tsunami areas. And also in understanding potential urban planning strategies. So this is actually the basis of the points that I'm going to cover in the next few slides. So in this study, we have actually identified the nature and extent of existing strategies for urban planning. And I'm going to actually discuss that under four headings. The four areas are: the first one is actually the spatial planning, second one is community and the other stakeholder participation, third one is resilient thinking and approaches, and finally hard and soft engineering. So just to sort of get into a little bit more details about these strategies. Spatial planning, of course the urban planners are very familiar with this philosophy. For example, land use planning is a major instrument for tackling disaster risk. The inclusion of public open spaces, for example, and green spaces can be used to further empower the disaster resilience of cities while providing other ecosystem services for communities. If you take community and the other stakeholder participation, inclusion of different layers of the community in the planning process, especially vulnerable and marginalized groups as well as different age groups, genders and ethnicities are included under this particular strategy. If you sort of move on to the third strategy, which is actually, I have identified that as resilience thinking approaches. For example, such as through the development of appropriate capacities of the urban system based on a combination of absorbing disturbances and achieving balance. And also concepts such as nature-based solutions in urban disaster resilience as a way of reducing disaster risk in tsunami-prone areas in particular. And also the resilient thinking approaches stresses this concept called thinking ahead approach, which actually integrates relief and development through long-term disaster risk reduction strategies. And the final strategy that I want to emphasize here is hard and soft engineering, which actually involves using artificial structures, whereas the soft engineering actually deals with management of more sustainable and natural approach. For example, hard engineering actually can contain seawalls, and other hard engineering structures. Soft engineering can be beach nourishment and mangrove cultivation and so on and so forth. But by linking the two together, we can also talk about the combined measures such as beach nourishments and so on and so forth. So in demonstrating by means of a figure, this is actually the nature of existing strategies for urban planning. The importance here is that I have actually categorized them under different stages of the disaster management cycle, also the pre-disaster, during disaster, and also the post-disaster. So of course, due to lack of time, I'm not going to go into detail, but this will actually will help to understand what the strategies that will help from the point of view of urban planning towards disaster risk reduction in cities. But of course, these approaches have limitations. What are they? For example, their failure to address multi-hazard threats and systemic risk. This is really, really important. No country or city is capable of dealing with disasters in isolation. You need to think them as by way of integrated approach. So that is actually missing in lot of strategies. And also in some cases there is inadequate community participation, which is actually quite an important point. And also lack of disaster risk information or limited access. That has been identified as a limitation. And also poorly planned urban environments, unfortunately supported by weak urban governance. So by means of key summary points, I want to highlight 5 summary points here. What are they? For example, I want to emphasize the fact that urban planning has the potential to greatly influence risk-sensitive urban development, which is actually undoubtedly, I support that point. And also, urban planning can serve as a key tool for limiting the disastrous effects of hazards and for enhancing community resilience. So that is actually the basis of my brief intervention. And also with that, the potential to reduce disaster risk through proper urban planning approaches, where understanding of risk are increasingly being integrated within the wider process of urban planning. I want to emphasize that point as well. And with that in mind, there's a need that the future initiatives will need to establish guiding planning principles, build goal-oriented and assessment frameworks, for example. So how can we do that? In my view, this should be pursued in parallel with the development of a common framework to unify urban planning literature. A common set of urban planning strategies can emerge for multi-hazard scenarios and to tackle seismic risk in that way. Thank you very much for listening, and these are some of the takeaway points that I want to emphasize. Thank you.